consider this a professional courtesy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome back to it, everyone. Getting back into the swing of things. Feels pretty good. Today's show should be somewhat interesting. We've got a few tantalizing tidbits to discuss today, a few interesting stats, and we talked a little bit about California yesterday. Seems only fair to explore the realities way over on the other coast. We're going to talk a little bit about New York. Some of the numbers coming out there are a little bit of a shocker. Does it challenge a lot of the things that we've seen over the last year? Does it challenge a lot of the headlines that we see about how we should be expecting continued tons of growth? Remember, we talked yesterday about the expectations of the folks from a variety of different sources about how 2018 just being 2017 all over again. We'll see about that. We'll see if that rings true. One thing, I hope this isn't a spoiler alert, but none of what we're about to talk about has me thinking I'm making a mistake by selling my home in 2018. So take that for what it's worth. Other news. So as some of you may remember, I mentioned that my website, actually, most of my web stuff got hacked. So I'm recovering from that. But I did manage to get enough control back of everything so that when you go to therebelbroker.com, you'll now go to what I'm calling my backup site. I'm thinking that site's going to stay there and exist forever, but you can go there and you can still continue to reach out to me. There is there's a big graphic at the top of the page, and at the bottom of that graphic are a series of buttons. One of them is a cute little picture of an envelope, so you can email me. You can add yourself to the Rebel Underground there. There's a button over to the right to let you do that. And above that button is a button to support the show by taking the survey we've talked about so much. So for those of you who are new, about once a month, well, pretty much every month except for last month, we did a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, that's my gift to you for going to the trouble of filling out a survey that is a demographic style thing that is really just intended to help me grow my show. Of course, the show doesn't grow without your help. You're the folks who make it grow. I just sort of offer up what I'm seeing in the real estate world, news that I think is important, and hopefully a lot of other cool things, some how-to stuff, that kind of stuff. And in order to thank you for taking the time out and doing that informational survey, I'm doing a drawing every month for a $50 Amazon gift card. We're going to go ahead and do one here. I think we'll probably go ahead and do one on this Sunday. So today is January 4th. It's Thursday. So you've got till 5 p.m. Pacific time this Sunday to get your name into the drawing. If you're someone who's already done it, thank you very much. Your name is still in the drawing for the drawing. It's not one of those things where I start fresh every month with only the folks who registered during that 30-day period. So if you are one of the wonderful people who 6, 7, however long ago, months ago, we started doing this, ponied up your time and effort to give some information to get that demographic stuff started, you're still in the drawing, so don't lose hope. Congrats to the folks who have won. We've given away somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 or $700 so far, and good luck to those of you who have yet to win. Now, if you'd like to join the Rebel Underground, again, you can go to therebelbroker.com. But if you'd rather not, if you'd rather just use your phone and text it in, you can text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222. Just follow the prompts. You'll get a response so that it's clear you're talking to who you think you're talking to. Provide the information asked for, and you're in. You are in the Rebel Underground. And the goal with the Rebel Underground is to give you more insider information, to give you access to videos that I create that are presented through YouTube, but only offered to folks who are within the Rebel Underground network. So thank you for joining that. And it's also one of those things where I don't like to spam you. I don't want to throw stuff at you all the time. So the folks who are in the group now are probably more upset that they don't get more. That's what I hear back actually from people, is that I'm not sending them enough stuff, which is true. I've tried to really only do it when it's very super important stuff. But I've committed now to doing at least quarterly newsletter style updates where I provide you a little bit of inside baseball on things I'm doing, how to calculate good investments, those types of things, and really make it a tool where you take it to the next level in terms of things that we chat about here on the show. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's go for the meat first. We've got this big old story relating to New York. I'm getting this data from CNBC, but of course, if you were simply to go out and Google this, you'd be able to get it from a lot of different sources. It's really just straight data. We've also got several other things relating to some interesting data on what home prices have done over year to year up to November, which is the last month we have data for. Apartment vacancy rates, the rate at which homes are selling. And also some interesting numbers relating to what people are doing with a personal income increase. It's a little bit more shocking maybe than it should be, but it's definitely not the trend we've been seeing in the past. So we'll talk about all that. But let's go ahead and start with this New York stuff. First of all, Manhattan real estate sales and prices took a fall in the fourth quarter, according to a new report from Douglas Elliman Real Estate and Miller Samuel. Total sales volume fell 12% compared with the fourth quarter of last year. So now that's an important thing to understand. When you're reading articles that are trying to generate buzz, that are trying to become that clickbait or get people talking about it, they won't tell you that kind of thing, that they're comparing the same time of the year between 2 years. Oftentimes what they'll do, particularly when we go into wintertime, is they'll make a big stink about the fact that sales dropped between October and November. Well, of course sales dropped between October and November. That's a seasonal change. That's normal. But when they're telling you that the numbers for a quarter compared to the same quarter in the previous year are different, that's when you should sit up and take notice. Whether they're talking about quarters or months or whatever, as long as you're talking about the same time of year the previous year, you're good to go. Now, are there any exceptions to that? Yes, and we've had plenty of those over the last year. If in a specific region there was some sort of natural disaster, a flood or a storm or anything like that, always be mentally aware of that. Because if you see a huge change from year to year and you assume that is strictly a market-driven thing and not a natural disaster-driven thing, you could potentially make some bad choices. The folks who are really only going to be the most susceptible to this are folks who are potentially looking to invest from a distance. So maybe you don't know because you don't live in that part of Florida or that part of Texas or that part of Virginia or wherever that those things went on a year ago. The data could be misleading for you. So just make sure you're aware of that. If you see big weird shifts that you can't quite explain just by looking at the marketplace. Okay, so continuing on with our look at New York. And again, remember, we're talking quarter-to-quarter comparison. Sales took a fall. Total sales volume fell 12% compared with the same time the previous year. The average sales price in Manhattan fell below $2 million for the first time in nearly 2 years. Okay, now once we start talking like that, where the average price in Manhattan goes below $2 million, a lot of people suddenly get the wind knocked out of them. But what we need to understand is don't let the number scare you. Let the trend be what informs you, because that's what we want to figure out, right? Me as an investor, I'm not going to go spend $2 million on a investment property unless that thing is a 20-unit multi-unit property. Granted, those could be in there, but I realize that the majority of you aren't at that. You're not at the I'm going to buy something for $2 million level. You're probably thinking more in terms of single families or maybe duplexes or quads, and looking to graduate beyond quads once you get to a certain point. But what we want to pin down here is the trend that we're seeing. What does that tell us about what's going on in that big marketplace? And when we start to see things like this happen in big markets, what should we start thinking about the effect on the rest of the marketplace? Because remember, we spent a little time yesterday covering things going on in California and how we use some of these different regions to be canaries in that coal mine. What marketplaces should you pay attention to so that when you see things turn interesting in an interesting statistical way, what should that have you thinking? Should you be more cautious? Should you be paying more attention to certain data in your marketplace that could change a decision that you potentially are going to make? Now, the headline itself says New York real estate has hit its worst quarter in 6 years. So that's staying a lot. And when you realize that what we've been seeing in the marketplace generally over the last 6 years has been this huge ramp up where things have just getting more and more expensive. Seeing something that's a turning point, anytime you see a shift, those are good things to note and to potentially understand as a window of opportunity. Whenever you see a change in something like that, that's where you might find those good opportunities. All right. Let's see. Brokers say the declines were simply the result of uncertainty around the Republican tax plan as buyers held off until the details of the new law became clear. They say many of those buyers have since rushed in and will help show a rebound. So that's an interesting thing to note. We didn't see a whole lot of that here in California. Interesting that they're saying this may have had a big effect in New York. My feeling is that there is a segment of the buying population where that would be true. And at the price point we're talking about, it could be those folks, right? I haven't seen anybody delay their shopping experience or for buying a home at sort of the consumer level, right? Where people are paying the average price for a home or maybe a little over or maybe a little under. But I could see people who have $2 million to blow on a property in Manhattan who probably also have tax attorneys and other stuff who might be making decisions based on other things that the rest of us don't really take into account a whole lot when we're doing something like this. I could see this being something that might have had a chilling effect on higher end buyers. So that could be one way to simply put this aside. But one thing that's going to be interesting is to see what happens in the first quarter of this year. If we do see a rebound, that sounds like a fairly reasonable explanation for why there may have been such a dramatic softening. The luxury market in Manhattan is suffering from an expanding glut of high-end and highly priced apartments. Analysts say that while sales may rebound slightly in the first quarter of 2018, the tax law, which limits the deductibility of state and local taxes, will continue to add pressure to New York City housing prices, especially at the top. Quote, there will be an impact on prices and sales, but it may take up to 1.5 years to 2 years to see the full impact. Now, the other thing we need to take into account is, do we particularly care about what the cause is, right? If we're investors and we're just interested in taking the reality of what's happening in the market, do we care about that? Well, I suppose we do in terms of how this specific tax policy might affect our investments, right? Obviously, that's something that we're going to want to think about. But we also need to understand that some of these basic level effects on these real estate markets often cases are more psychological than they are anything else. I know when I'm talking, and you need to not be that person, right? You need to not be the emotional person who reads the headline or hears the rumor of what is or isn't going to happen and starts making big decisions based on that. And what's funny is the number of people I see who do that, who have simply heard on the news mentioned in passing that there's so many folks who are concerned about the tax plan, so they're not doing something because of it, or they are doing something because of it, without really getting details on what effect it would have on them specifically. Okay. According to folks in the market in New York, resales as opposed to new development are holding up strong, with median sales prices up 2% over last year, but prices for new developments fell 17% over last year, and the number of sales are down 20%. Now, this could also be a blending of the problem we talked about way back at the beginning of 2017, where, remember that statistic we talked about, where on average across the country, new construction used to be 6 to 10% more expensive than existing homes. And in a lot of markets, it was even tighter than that. It was like 5%. Lately, though, the reality has been that new construction, when compared to an existing property, new construction has been getting up to 20% above what a similar property would be that was a pre-existing property. So I think that trend, which was always a little bit nuts, may be just getting hit. And I think what was sustaining that was this high demand and low supply. And what we're currently starting to see, and I think this is an indicator of that, if there's a softening at that level, I'd really want to know how much more construction has come online, because one thing that would really serve to push down the price of these newer developments would be too much competition. They're not able to sell because there's too many other units competing with them. The article goes on to say the number of new developments is expected to continue to rise this year and next, which will add to inventory. Demand for low-end apartments priced at $1 million. Wow. That's when you work in a crazy market. Demand for low-end apartments priced at $1 million to $2 million remains strong. Sales of apartments of more than $5 million will get tougher. See, now, and my problem is this is the word apartment, right? And for me as a West Coast guy, you don't own an apartment. You own a condo. I guess on the East Coast, an apartment is a thing you own, right? You can buy an apartment. At least my understanding is that's the case. In part, that's because the rich have more discretion on when and where to buy homes, and with the costs of owning a home in New York going up with the tax plan, apartments aimed at the rich will see the biggest price hits. Quote, the sellers are already recalibrating after 2015. He said, now they will have to readjust again. So let's put this into perspective. I don't think this is something where we run out and start making decisions on this, but whenever we start to see performance weakness in the marketplace at any level, I'm not particularly interested in where it is, whether it's at the luxury level or whether it's at the more entry level or mid level. I think anytime you start to see a weakness, that's a good time to sit back and reassess and keep an eye on that marketplace. So the first quarter of 2018 in New York is going to be something I think we need to keep an eye on to see where it goes. If it is as simple as somehow thinking about the tax situation had that big of an effect, because that's a pretty big effect, okay, fine. Then we'll see a rebound, and it'll make it clear what the primary instigator of that was. If not, it's worth taking a longer look at the market in New York, just as I think it's worth taking a longer look at the market in California and a lot of different areas, to look for those interesting pivot points where things change, and in those changes, we potentially find some great opportunities. All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to talk about all the other items I laid out at the beginning of the show, but we're going to take a quick break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We are just getting rolling here in the first week of 2018, hopefully sharing with you some interesting information that'll help guide you in the things that you're considering as you move forward with your real estate goals. Next on the hit list here is an article from the good folks at Calculated Risk. Man, they're great at sharing some good numbers here. Sometimes I'm not always 100% on board with their interpretation of these numbers, but they're a really good source of oftentimes off the beaten path stats that I think are worth knowing about. Now, the one they're sharing with us at this point is probably one you'll hear at a variety of different places, but house prices up 7% year over year in November. These are the final numbers for this one. That's the Case-Shiller Index release was for October. CoreLogic HPI is a 3-month weighted average, is not seasonally adjusted. Home prices nationally increased year over year by 7% from November 2016 to November 2017. And that's just, that's an insane and what I think to be primarily unsustainable number moving forward. There are some areas where income just hasn't kept up with this stuff at all. And there is a breaking point, right? There comes a point where you can't just assume that the folks who are in the top 20% of earners, 30% of earners are going to keep buying houses. And the folks who are below that level simply aren't going to do it. and then no one's going to be buying. The market forces are going to have to make this adjust. So we'll see how it plays out. This isn't one of those deals where it can just simply go up and up and up forever, because the reality is the market plays a part in this. All right, next on the list here, and this is another one that I think is interesting. Apartment vacancy rate increased in the fourth quarter to 4.5%. That's a general number. This is reported that the apartment vacancy rate was 4.5% in the fourth quarter of 2017, up 4.4% in the third quarter, and up from 4.2% in the fourth quarter of 2016. Highest vacancy rate since the fourth quarter of 2012. The vacancy rate peaked at 8% at the end of 2009 and bottomed at 4.1% in 2016. So if you're thinking about this as sort of a plotted graph, right, we're at a point where it's pivoting, right? And this is one reason why these are statistics I'm talking to you about. These are all markets that interplay with one another, and we are at a pivot point. We are at a point where it has reached this bottom number and is now kind of going up. It's making a trend back up again. That indicates a point where you might see change. So I find this very interesting. And this is a great number for me because in my local marketplace, we have had a ton of apartment complexes built. I mentioned it yesterday. And for any of you out there that live in areas where lots of apartment complexes have been built, this is something that could profoundly influence your local marketplace. Now, we talked a little bit yesterday about incentives that are being put out there for folks for apartment rentals. Absolutely true. Gigantic banners on the apartment complexes that I see around Silicon Valley in terms of first month for free, first and last free. There's a bunch of different incentives out there. So clearly folks are trying to get these things filled up. And we'll see how that plays out. Apartment living tends to be the least desirable. So if you're someone who's renting something that's a step up from apartments, I think you still have a potential market out there that's going to keep you going, even in the face of this increased apartment stuff, unless these guys with the apartment complexes that are just huge organizations, right? Because we're not talking about 8-unit apartment complexes. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of units in these apartment complexes. At some point, their computer continues to do the math, and the amount of rent that they need to charge goes way down simply because in order to maintain the facilities for these gigantic buildings, they need to get these things populated. They need to get people in these units. So that could be an interesting pressure on the rental market in your local area. If your renters of your house see they could get it depends on your house, right? If you have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home, the problem is that you're going to find that in terms of space, some of these apartments are going to compete with you. You get a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, and you've got a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house. That's one reason why I've never been a huge fan of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath house. It can work. There's a lot of markets where it can work, but I've always preferred the 3-bedroom because that tends to be something that separates you a little bit more from apartment style living. Usually your square footage is going to be better in a single family residential home as well, and your space clearly because you've got elbow room. So in a lot of ways, you're still going to be protected to a certain point. But when these prices drop enough, there's going to be a tipping point where I think it threatens those of you who have single family residential homes that are offering the same amount of living space as some of these apartment complexes. So I think while a lot of you out there may ignore trends like this or offerings like this, even though I have nothing that sits in competition with these apartment complexes, when these new places open, I always go and check it out, even if it just means walking into the lobby. And usually they've got a flyer that'll show you the floor plan. Even that's fine, right? Just to get an idea of what they offer and the maximum number of rooms you can get in these. And I'll tell you, 3 bedrooms are super rare in a lot of these units that I've gone to. Typically, they're only offering 2 bedrooms. Okay. Next on our hit list from the National Association of Realtors, homes are still selling faster than ever. Now, where we are now, the time a home spent on the market hit an all-time low in 2017 at just 3 weeks. We've talked here on real world numbers that I've shared with you from the market here in my county, where the time on market is as low as 18 to 25 days. It's crazy. So we're seeing that 3-week window, but even lower in some areas that I serve. We had a period of time there in 2017 where it was something like 13 days was the average days on market. Absolutely ridiculous. A low inventory of homes for sale mixed with strong buyer demand has helped to keep the market times low from 2014 to 2017. During the height of the housing boom from 2001 to 2005, homes sold within a month of being listed. But as the housing market began to slow in 2006, the median time jumped to 6 weeks and then to 10 weeks by 2009. And that, of course, was affected also by price banding. Now, that's something we've talked about here on the show before, where you tend to see certain kinds of performance in different price bands. So a good example is right now, we have some interesting price banding going on in a market that I serve, where homes that are priced below about $1.1 million selling ridiculously fast. But as soon as you hit $1.2 million, things tend to slow down in this marketplace. That's price banding, right? So when you're pricing your home in a market like that, you need to consider the implications of that. So if you were going to list your home at $1.2 million, maybe it's worth listing it at 1.19, right? Because you want to show up in searches. It might be because people are doing their searches for things only under 1.2 million, or it could be other factors in terms of people just not being interested in paying that level of money, or there's just much fewer buyers at that point. There could be a lot of different influences. But when you start to see that mixed with lots of folks visiting, it tends to be an interesting thing where people are clearly deciding to settle for slightly less of what they were looking for based on the price. So just something to be aware of. And in your local market, you can usually spot these, but it'll take a pretty decent real estate person who really gets into the numbers of your local marketplace to spot these trends. But they should have all the tools they need. I know my particular MLS system lets me do searches on a lot of different variables, so I'm able to pull this kind of stuff up. All right, finally, the last piece of data I wanted to share with you is personal income. Now, we talk about personal income because I think it can tell us an awful lot of things. It can tell us, are people making more or less? What are people doing with that? What we've seen in November is personal income increased 0.3%. And we keep track of this also because clearly nobody's income is keeping up with the increasing housing prices, right? So as those two things completely get away from each other, more and more stress gets put on the marketplace for prices to not go up, because you are simply creating a market where fewer and fewer buyers can even buy. But the next number is also one that I look at and is usually reported at the same time, and that is spending increasing. So in other words, here's your personal income increase. This is how much more you made. How did your spending get affected by that? Now, in the past, when we've talked about this number, we've had some pretty good reports. We've had instances where, say, personal income went up 0.2% and personal spending only went up 0.1%. Or we've had times when the two numbers were equal. People got a little bit of a boost in what they were making and they spent the same amount. So they ended up spending everything they got in addition in terms of their personal income. This is one of the first times I've seen such a big difference between those two numbers. Now, the personal income increase was 0.3%, but the spending increase was 0.6%. So, in other words, if you made an extra $100, you spent $200. So you went $100 into debt based on your overall income. This is a concerning thing, and it links in with a lot of other stuff we've talked about in terms of auto debt, student loans, all these are the things we've talked about. We spent a lot of time in 2017 talking about the overall debt portfolio of the average person. How much money do they owe? And the reason why we were concerned about that was because at a certain point, at a certain tipping point of debt, people start making decisions that will affect the real estate world. Just like we saw last time. That was at its core what happened the last time. When you start, now people right now are still pretty confident that their homes are going to be worth X amount of dollars. There's not a lot of stress on that. But if we do start to see influences that bring those values down, folks who are already under a huge debt portfolio or a huge debt burden, start looking at that situation and start wondering if it's worth it for them to stick with certain debts and abandon them, right? We've talked about Students who have abandoned their college loans and are not paying them. We've talked about people who've stopped making their car payments. And we've talked about the kinds of things that seem to lead to folks deciding to stop making their mortgage payments in favor of buying another home, moving into it, and then stopping the payments on their primary home. Now, I think the way our lending is set up now, that's not as likely to happen. I don't think that's a phenomenon that can happen today. Now, it can to one degree or another. I know that I was able to qualify for a loan while I still owned a house. As long as I had a rental agreement in my hands to rent the house I was currently financing, I'd get a loan to buy that new house across the street. So keep that in mind. There are ways to do it, slightly more complicated than it used to be, but it's still out there. The folks at Calculated Risk give us a little bit more detail about the numbers. Personal income increased 54 billion, 0.3% in November, according to estimates released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Disposable personal income increased by 50.9 billion, 0.4%, and personal consumption expenditures increased 87.1 billion, or 0.6%. The real DPI increased, which is the disposable personal income, increased 0.1% in November, and real PCE, which is personal consumption expenditure, increased 0.4%. The PCE price index increased 0.2. Excluding food and energy, the PCE price index increased 0.1. So that's a concern in terms of thinking in terms of what people are earning versus what they're spending, because they're contributing to their indebtedness, right? When you're spending more than you're bringing in, that's overall adding to your indebtedness. And the reason why we care about that is because it affects how debts are being managed by individuals as we move forward, which affects the decisions that they make in managing their debt and also in what more debt they're willing to take on. And in cases like this, it makes it difficult for a lot of folks to be able to get themselves into a position where home purchases are a realistic thing that they can do if they're spending that much more above what they're actually earning. Accumulating more and more debt works against that. All right, folks. I hope you have gotten some good info out of today's show. The goal, as always, is to leave you with a lot more value on the table than you invested in time to listen. Hope we've achieved that today. That is absolutely what I'm hoping to deliver. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to y'all next time.